Welcome to the First Universalist Church of Rochester, where we are called to nurture the spirit and serve the community. Whoever you are, we welcome you. Whomever you love, we welcome you. Wherever you are at this moment, and however you are feeling at this moment, we welcome you. We welcome all of you. It is good to be together this morning. If you are here for the first time this morning, we especially welcome you. As we begin this new way of worshiping, as Reverend Michelle said earlier, we ask you to please remain muted throughout the service. When multiple voices sing or speak together, they can overlap in a way that makes it hard to follow the service. So, hello, how are you? To welcome each other into this space, we invite you to pop into the chat and offer a greeting. It could be a wave of hello, or even a few words. Everyone who is here with us will be able to see your greeting in the chat box. Welcome to worship at First Universalist. This Sunday, we welcome to our virtual pulpit the Reverend Peter Peters. Reverend Peters is an Episcopal minister who has focused in his retirement on ministry for and with the housing vulnerable. He is a founding member of REACH Advocacy, which advocates for and with chronically homeless persons in the Rochester area and works to create safe housing options. A number of people in this congregation volunteer with REACH. We are very grateful to have Reverend Peters with us this morning. And now you may rise in body or spirit as you wish from wherever you are for our opening hymn. Our musicians, Kitty and Brock, are standing by in the sanctuary to lead us in song. Please remember to remain muted as we sing together hymn number 134, Our World is One World. A familiar Unitarian Universalist hymn asks, "Where is our holy church?" We have a beautiful building, but it is not our church. We create our church when we feed the homeless, when we laugh or cry together, when we teach our children, when we care for one another and the world, whenever and however we gather. This here now is our holy church. In the name of the love that makes us one, come, let us worship together. And now, as we light our chalice, whoops, my little chalice, will you join me in saying our chalice words in unison? May we be a people of welcome, here to grow in heart and mind and spirit, and may we reach out to serve our community.
Good morning. My name is...
by email, but I didn't know if you have any.
We need to mute. Would you please mute? Thank you. Good morning. My name is Lisa Gwinner, and I'm here on the beach in Rochester to tell you why I support the vision of this church by making a yearly financial contribution. Stated simply, the vision of our church is we will become a congregation that welcomes, grows, and reaches out. So I spent some time thinking about my time here at First Universalist using this framework and realized that welcoming, growing, and reaching out are things we do and have done for a long time. I first walked into our church in the fall of 1977. I was a 19-year-old college student at MCC. My family had moved away to follow my father's job, which had happened for most of my life and resulted in my having attended 8 different schools by the time I graduated from high school. So I decided to stay in Rochester when my family left. And so we found a home with neighbors of ours, Sally and Bob Stevens, who were members of this church. Sally invited me to come to church with them, and curious, I came along. I arrived at a time when our congregation was shrinking during the final year of the Reverend John Shallow's ministry, which had proven divisive to our congregation. However, I felt comfortable and at home here. I had been raised Catholic, but my family left the church when I was 12, and I'd been exploring other faiths, such as Zen Buddhism, as I came across them. There weren't really any people my age at our church at the time, but religiously, Unitarian Universalism was a perfect fit for me, and the congregation was warm and very welcoming. I was asked to participate in the life of the church quite early in my time here, helping with weekly lunches, decorating the sanctuary for holidays, and being paired with Eleanor Siegfried to teach religious education. What a joy. I signed the book in April of 1978, and just a couple months after my 20th birthday, and that's just a couple weeks shy of 42 years ago. So what has kept me involved at our church for 42 years? I've discovered that for me, Unitarian Universalism is a faith that grows with me instead of being outgrown. I've been encouraged to learn and read and to explore spiritually, which has kept this faith fresh for me. Having so many companions on the journey has challenged and supported me. Through these years, we have called ministers who have challenged and supported this community in faith and growth. We have literally grown and shrunk members-wise throughout these years, but have never lost our momentum. I met my husband, Charlie, here at First Universalist. We were married in the church, and we have raised our son, Brendan, with this community as a huge part of our supportive village. This community has supported me as well in the past year, as I've learned that despite 2 spinal reconstruction surgeries, I will not fully recover, and I will need assistance to walk for the rest of my life. If we were not in the midst of a global pandemic, I'd be looking out at the faces of my church family right now. To be honest, not many are the same faces that I saw 42 years ago. I've attended an awful lot of memorial services over the years, and many people have moved on to different places and different faiths, different journeys. But in some mysterious way, when I look at the faces in our sanctuary, my church family just looks as familiar. I believe this is because our church has reached out over these years to welcome others into this faith community, into the worship, into the work, and into the service we provide to our larger community. Many of us have found that the things we can't do alone, we can do together. The way I think of it, the vision of this church is a statement of values that are really important to us and have been for a long time. It's a reminder to us that even as the world changes, as people change, as circumstances change, we remain true to the vision of this church by keeping our hearts and minds open to welcoming, growing, and reaching out. And this is why I support our vision by making a financial pledge to the church. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you, Lisa. Please join me now in reading our affirmation of faith, followed by the doxology. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the source and meaning of life, thus to a covenant with each other and with all. There will be an offering to sustain the life and work of this congregation. More than ever, we need this community of hope, where we bear witness to one another's lives, a place to reconnect with our deepest values and to join together to heal the world. Grateful for all we have received, we freely share our gifts as we are able with our church. We won't be passing the plate today, so Reverend Michelle has posted a link in the chat that you can use to make an online donation. The offering will now be given and gratefully received.
she didn't fit in there. Oh, think twice, 'cause it's another day for you and me in paradise. Oh, think twice, 'cause it's another day for you and me in paradise. Just think about it. Just another day for you and me in paradise. Just another day for you and me in paradise. Just think about it. Just think about it. Just think about it.
Thank you. Can you hear me now? Thank you for your generous grace. So this time of year, whenever I think of St. Patrick's Day, I also try and remember the other holidays that happen this time of year, like the Hindu holiday of Holi, where they throw colors everywhere, and of course the Jewish celebration of Purim, which tells the story of Queen Esther, and that's what I'm going to be telling today. Now, the puppets I'm going to be using are very white. Don't let that confuse you with the characters in this story actually being Middle Eastern Jews. But that's what I have available to me. The king that we regularly know as Xerxes, who lived in the Middle East, I think he was always concerned about people being afraid that he didn't have enough power. Yeah, because when his wife, Vashti, didn't listen to him, didn't obey everything she said, so he was in the market for a new wife, and very much like Cinderella, invited all the eligible maidens of the kingdom to come. And one of them was particularly beautiful, Esther. Now, the Jewish people at this time were living in Babylon, in Xerxes' country, not in Israel, but they weren't particularly beloved in the area. But Xerxes thought that Esther was pretty, and that worked enough for him for a queen. So they were married. But Esther also had an uncle Mordecai, who was a close advisor of the king. Now, it just so happened another advisor of the king, Haman, which is always fun to tell this story because people will bring out noisemakers and go, boo, whenever you say Haman. Haman did not like the Jewish people, and he really didn't like Mordecai. And I'm short on puppets, so Mordecai is very wise, the wise dragon. Haman did not like Mordecai and so wanted to get rid of him. And he thought, well, if I could just turn the king against all the Jewish people, then that would put me in a very big position of power and I could replace Mordecai. So that's what he did. So he went to the king and he convinced him that the Jews were bad and they were after his throne. And he was going to set out an order to say that all of the Jews had to be killed. Now, the king didn't know that his wife was Jewish. And she was afraid that if she admitted it to him, or if she went to him when she wasn't asked to, because that was kind of the way he was. But she thought these were her people, and she could see that they were in need. And so even if it meant that it might not work out well for her, she had to do something. She had to say something. So she went to her husband, the king, King Xerxes, and confessed to him that she was Jewish and begged that he not kill all the Jewish people, and told him that it was Haman's evil plot to try and kill the Jewish people and get power for himself. And they were very lucky that he listened and believed her. And instead questioned and got rid of Haman as his advisor instead of Mordecai. Now, the way that Jews often celebrate Purim is it's almost like Halloween. Everyone dresses up in costume because they call it the hidden holiday. Because in this story, God isn't officially mentioned anywhere as intervening. So it's the way that the divine works through us in people, behind the faces that you see every day. And especially today, as we talk about the homeless populations here in Rochester, to remember Esther's story, that she could see her people. And of course, our people are all people. And she was willing to sacrifice her own privilege and maybe even her own life to say what was true and right and to make sure that others didn't suffer. Thank you for listening to our story today. I invite you to join in our hymn of affirmation, which Kitty will lead us, and it's a new hymn of affirmation, but very pretty. The words are in your order of service document or in your music document. I'm going.
Brock is going to play this through one time, and then we'll sing it together twice.
I invite you now into a reverent time of sharing the joys and sorrows of our gathered community. If you would like to, you can place your hand over your heart to be able to listen from a heart-centered place. As we place stones into a bowl, please share your joys and sorrows in the chat that we may hear from the community gathered here. And we drop one final stone into the bowl to represent all the joys and sorrows left unspoken in the silent sanctuaries of our hearts. May all be held in the heart of love. I invite you now to take a deep breath. Center yourself as we enter into this time of prayer and contemplation. These are the words of the Reverend Lynn Unger. Pandemic. What if you thought of it as the Jews consider the Sabbath, the most sacred of times? Cease from travel, cease from buying and selling. Give up, just for now, on trying to make the world different than it is. Sing, pray, center down. And when your body has become still, reach out with your heart. Know that we are connected in ways that are terrifying and beautiful. You could hardly deny it now. Know that our lives are in one another's hands. Surely that has become clear. Do not reach out your hands. Reach out your heart. Reach out your words. Reach out all the tendrils of compassion that move invisibly where we cannot touch. Promise this world your love, for better or for worse, in sickness or in health, so long as we all shall live. Let's take a few moments to be silent together.
Let's sing together hymn number 396. I know this rose will open.
Today's reading is the parable of the Good Samaritan from Luke chapter 10, verses 23 through 37. Just then a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" The lawyer answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." Jesus said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this and you will live." But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, And who is my neighbor? Jesus replied, A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed on by on the other side of the road. So likewise a Levite, a judge, when he came to the place and saw the man, he passed by on the other side of the road as well. But a Samaritan, a man from another land, of another religion, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii. A denarii was 1 day's wages, and gave them to the innkeeper, and said, Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you for whatever more you spend. Which of these three people, do you think, was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The lawyer said, The one who showed him mercy. Jesus said, Then go and do likewise. So ends our reading today.
Thank you for inviting me and for your ongoing support of REACH's mission to meet the needs of housing-deprived men and women in our region. Like all of you, this medium is new for me, so please bear with me as I struggle on. As many of you know, REACH has had an evolving sense of identity and mission during its 6 years of existence. We first began as REACH Home. And on this next slide, you will see our current home. It is a marvelous home on 721 West Main Street. REACH Home offers winter shelter for chronically homeless men and women. Even at this first experience 5 years ago, we were committed to the idea proposed in the Housing First approach to homelessness, Very simply, this meant that we understood that to truly help the housing deprived, we need to first secure for them housing. Once housed, and without anxiety about where they will sleep, people will become better able to meet their challenges, whatever that may be. In our first year, and indeed in each succeeding year, we have placed 40% or more of our guests into permanent supportive housing. 5 years later, we still operate an emergency winter shelter and still enable 40% of our guests to find some form of permanent housing. But somewhere we began to ask ourselves, how could we do more than this kind of Band-Aid work in meeting the needs of men and women who had nowhere to sleep in safety? Could we help to address the truly lack of affordable and supportive housing for this population? We learned that most of the developments going up in our city, even those that were labeled affordable, were just not affordable for more than 10,000 households who live below 30% of the area median income. This led us to explore the idea of a tiny home village. We know that many of our guests have a real emotional issue with living in apartment blocks. Tiny homes offered a solution, and we began to explore the idea. Eventually, we found a city-owned vacant site on St. Paul Street for a pilot tiny home village. We have had several very encouraging conversations with the city, and now have worked with an architectural company and have preliminary plans, which you can see on the screen. We have a building site manager, and we are moving forward with a developer's advice and support. We have promised or raised in hand approximately $100,000 toward this project, and hope to be announcing a capital fund drive very shortly and to begin building later this year. But once again, we realized that even this will be a drop in the bucket for what is a truly systemic problem. And so we became REACH Advocacy, seeking to change the way we speak about the homeless and to find ways to address systemic changes that we could help bring about. The first thing to say is that REACH has come to the conclusion that we should no longer speak of homeless men and women or of the homeless problem. This kind of language implies that in some way people are the problem, when what is needed is language that describes a failing housing system. Just as poverty is not rooted in failing people, so the lack of place to sleep is not rooted in failing people. There are many contributing factors, some political, some structural, and some personal. To combat the prevailing narrative around the homeless, or rather the housing deprived, REACH has adopted the notion of housing as a human right. It is this fundamental conviction that informs each aspect of our mission. Our nation has had a long history of expanding the idea of human rights, whether it is about the right to freedom from slavery, the right to vote, regardless of ethnicity or gender, the right to speak freely, and lately, the right to marry a person of one's choice. 2 Sundays ago, Sarah and I had the joy of being with thousands celebrating the 55th anniversary of the crossing of the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, the modern beginning of the civil rights movement. So we are accustomed to thinking about rights, but when did housing become thought of as a human right? Only recently, In 1944, President Roosevelt, in his State of the Union speech, spoke of the right of every American to a decent home. And Eleanor Roosevelt played a big part in the framing of the United Nations Bill of Human Rights, where it says in Article 25, everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and his family, including food, clothing, housing. Housing is now clearly linked to human flourishing, and it is incumbent upon any social system to ensure that everyone is housed. This should come as no surprise to people of faith. Prior to this era of human rights, all major religions spoke about how we care for the stranger in our midst. Codes of hospitality developed to express ways in which religious cultures care for those most vulnerable among them. As one scholar says, hospitality is a central and inaugural event in the world's great wisdom tradition. It marks that moment when the self opens to the stranger. So I would like now to review the theme of hospitality in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. In the Passover celebration, when Jews recall their lot as slaves in Egypt, families are reminded that as they gather for their festival meal, the stranger who resides with you shall be to you as one of your citizens. You shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. This idea of recalling their own existence as strangers in a strange land serves to shape the way they are expected to treat the stranger in their community. Later in the Jewish liturgical calendar, the festival of Sukkot literally asks people to abandon the security of their homes and live in temporary dwelling, symbolizing their sojourn in the wilderness. And what is more, they are expected to welcome strangers as guests in this vulnerable state. What this tradition invokes in me is that perhaps to meet the needs of the homeless, we all need to somehow embrace our own fears of being without the comfort of home and hearth in order to welcome them into a safe place. One scholar has written, the command to build a sukkah and live in it for a time each year reminds the Jews not only of their dependence on God and their status as guests, but also of the obligation to extend the hospitality they have received to others, including strangers. In short, this Jewish tradition reminds us that we are all guests in the deepest sense of that word, and that our homeless brothers and sisters compel us to treat them also as guests. And the later Jewish prophets never ceased to remind them that they were strangers in a strange land, and that the way they lived toward one another and toward their neighbors would be a light to the world. Possession is not everything. How we treat the widow, the orphan, and we might add, the housing deprived, is truly what makes us a people. As we turn to the Christian tradition, I want to acknowledge a paradox. Much of the call to love our neighbor as ourselves, grounded in the Jewish origins of Christianity, is couched in a language that is concerned with the self. For example, when Jesus speaks of the good folk who will go into eternal life as those who feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, welcome the stranger, clothe the naked, and visit those in prison, it is a way of life motivated by love for the other, but couched in the language of the salvific benefits to the believer. Similarly, an early Christian writer exhorts the reader to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some have entertained angels without knowing. Here, some kind of enlightened self-interest is the motive. But on the other hand, if we look at the actual practice of Jesus, in welcoming all kinds of people to his table, we have a totally different picture. In fact, the primary liturgical practice of Christians is at the Eucharistic table, and this table must be understood in the light of Jesus's behavior. Jesus became a scandal to the religious leaders of his time because he ate and sat with people who were considered to be outside the pale of respectability, like many of our homeless people today. For most of his public teaching, Jesus appears to be a homeless itinerant preacher who stayed with and welcomed friends and supporters, no matter who they were, around the same table. Like our Jewish brothers and sisters, we learn hospitality at altars of remembrance, and we learn that in God's eyes, we are all guests at this table. The homeless stranger must be welcomed. One of the best known parables told by Jesus is that of the parable of the Good Samaritan. It is a tale that reflects existing cultural suspicion. Samaritans could not be trusted. The heart of Jesus' teaching in this parable is not about the Samaritan, but answers the general question, what does it mean to be a good neighbor? To be a good neighbor is to ignore cultural and class distinction and to meet the neighbor just where he or she is. In this case, a wounded man on the side of the road. Being a neighbor is to meet the other's need as it is presented to us. In this case, it was to bind the wounds and find a safe shelter. To be a follower of Jesus is to view our housing-deprived brothers and sisters as our neighbors and see that they are sheltered in a safe place. I turn now to Islam. I do not claim to be any kind of authority on Islam and will limit myself to accessible sacred texts as an indication of how this tradition views the call to be hospitable to the stranger. Islam shares with Judaism and Christianity a common root in the Abrahamic narrative and extols Abraham's quick and spontaneous hospitality towards visitors. Indeed, such hospitality can be said to be at the heart of the Islamic culture. Very early in the Quran, basic rules for the social practices expected from believers is established, such as this passage. Righteousness is not that you turn your faces toward the east or the west, but true righteousness is in one who believes in Allah, the last day, the angels, the book, and the prophets, and gives wealth, in spite of love for it, to relatives, orphans, the needy, the traveler. In short, a central practice of Islam is to share wealth and practice generosity to those in need. Throughout the Quran, worship is related to right conduct in how we treat one another, including the needy among us. And similar to both Judaism and Christianity, Muslims are reminded that they too are sojourners or guests on this planet. Did he not find you an orphan and shelter you? Did he not find you lost and guide you? Did he not find you in need and make you self-sufficient? And this reference goes on to say, so do not be harsh with the orphan and do not chide the one who asks for help. Talk about the blessings of your Lord. Finally, let me quote from a Muslim statement at the 2016 Interfaith Conference on Homelessness in Hawaii. Islam's position toward homelessness is best embodied by the hadith. He is not a Muslim who goes to bed satiated while his neighbor goes hungry. And that coincides with another hadith, which reads, none of you will believe until you love your brother, until you love for your brother what you love for yourself. Islamically, a person in need is not to be shamed, judged, or mocked for their lack of material items, as is common in society today. What this means in practice is that we do not treat the housing deprived as objects of charity, but as fellow guests on this planet. All of us as guests on the table of God's bounty have a part to play in how that bounty is shared. How we treat the neighbor is central to any idea of faithful living. To declare housing as a human right is one way to give political capital to this central notion of hospitality to the other. I invite us as people of faith to join in changing the narrative around homelessness, declaring housing as a human right, and that those who are not housed are being deprived of this basic right. I invite you to take three things away from these reflections. Hospitality to the stranger in our time means that no person should be without safe and affordable housing. It is to affirm the value that housing is a human right, and that we do not have a homeless problem. We have a housing problem. Thank you very much for inviting me to be with you, even in this odd time that I don't get to meet any of you and I don't get to see you. I'm used to meeting people and talking to them face to face, but this is a great solution to this pandemic time. Thank you for all that you do and for your fellowship in this work with our housing deprived men and women.
We're going to sing together our final hymn, which is number 95, There Is More Love Somewhere.
As we extinguish our chalice, let us read together the words printed in your order of service. We extinguish this flame, but we keep its light in our hearts with its message of love and justice, taking it outside these walls to the world we live in until we are together again. Today, we cannot reach out and touch each other physically, but let us hold each other in our hearts and minds, knowing we are part of a larger love that runs through and among us, connecting each of us to one another so that none of us is alone. Let's just breathe in some of that feeling of connection to one another. Breathe it in and store it to take with us in the week to come. In the week to come, may we find joy in the present moment, in the first daffodil, in a friend's voice on the phone, in taking a walk and waving to our neighbors. And let us be kind to ourselves, to one another, and to the stranger who is also our neighbor. Let the people of the church say, Amen.
Good morning again. I'm Lisa Gwinner, Chair of the Communications Committee. I extend a warm welcome to our visitors and guests. Thank you for worshiping with us this morning and joining in this grand experiment. If you would like to learn more about Unitarian Universalism and this congregation, we host a UU and U session on the third Sunday of every month, which will resume when we are back to worshiping in person. Please see your order of service for information on our upcoming activities and events. And here are today's announcements. The budget season is upon us. The Finance Committee will soon be hard at work developing next year's budget. If you have input, questions, or ideas about the 2020-2021 budget, we'd like to hear from you by March 31st. Contact info is listed in your order of service announcements. Thank you. There are still openings for the REACH dinner auction item. Sign up to and enjoy dinner served by the First Universalist REACH team on May 5th this year, 2020, at 5:30 in the Clara Barton Lounge. Come see and taste what we feed our less fortunate friends. Contact Tom Williams. Stewardship news. 2020, support our vision. Next Sunday, March 29th, is Stewardship Sunday. We ask that you please submit your pledge card by then. Being that we are dealing with uncharted times, we encourage you to pledge online this year. As a reminder, the stewardship link to pledge is at the very bottom on the right side of the homepage on the church's website, UURoc.org. You can also mail your pledge card to the church. According to collector Bill Jones, we have received 39 pledges as of yesterday, totaling $101,160, thanks to all who have pledged so far. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19 virus precautions, we have to postpone our annual Stewardship Sunday Pie Fest. However, we encourage you to share your favorite pie recipe with a fellow church member this week. Then we invite you to celebrate at home with a piece of pie after the service next week. We sincerely hope to be able to have our celebration in person later this church year. If you have questions, please ask Kathy Milch, Jim Milch, or Richard Reed. Our contact information can be found in the church directory. Thank you for your cooperation and understanding. Donating to Nestor Street Food Cupboard. March 28th, many folks in the congregation have reached out to check in on our monthly beneficiary of Food in Gathering, the food cupboard at Nestor Street. In 2 weeks, the food cupboard could use donations. So we will be taking a collection at First Universalist Church on Saturday, March 28th from 12 to 1 p.m. Please come by to drop off non-perishable foods and support our neighbors in this time of greater need. Questions, please contact Catherine Flynn. Enjoy your day and your week. We hope to see you next Sunday. Thank you very much.